Hi, I'm Jillian Zacks, an attorney with the Pittsburgh office of McAndrews, Mehalick, Connolly, Hulse and Ryan. And I'm happy to be here today with Amy Dolan Strano and Rebecca Halvorson to discuss trustees. As a practitioner, we often set up trusts for clients, and the big question is usually, what does a trustee do and how do I pick one? So today we're going to answer those questions and more regarding trustees. As I mentioned, I'm here with Amy Dolan Strano, and she is president of Achieva Family Trust in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Achieva Family Trust is a nonprofit trustee that administers special needs trusts that can include self-funded or payback special needs trusts, third-party funded or sometimes called supplemental needs trusts, and also the pooled trust. We are also joined by Becky Halvorson, who is senior vice president and managing director of corporate development for Cumberland Trust. Cumberland Trust is based in Nashville, Tennessee, and Becky is with their Memphis office. Cumberland Trust handles and administers many trusts, including special needs trusts, but also revocable trusts, younger beneficiary trust, marital trust, as well as insurance trusts, just to name a few. Both will offer insight into the operations of the trustee, and that will be very helpful for all of us as we do our planning. So first up, just a little background, what is a trust? Very simply, it's essentially a box. The attorney drafts the document, lays out the structure and the guides for the trustee, and you fill that box with different assets. Those assets could be cash, it could be real estate, it could be investments, it could be royalties from oil and gas. All different things can fill that box. The creator of the trust is called a grantor or a settlor. The beneficiary is just as it sounds. It's the individual who benefits from the assets in that box from the trust. And then the trustee is that person who puts their hand in the box and decides what that beneficiary will be able to have for a distribution. Now, that's very simple what they do. They do a whole lot more, and they have a lot more responsibilities, which we're going to learn about today. That would include investing and adhering to guidelines and uniform trust code provisions. All of that comes under what the trustee does. Now, we will talk today about special needs trusts. So as further background, a special needs trust is a trust used to allow a disabled beneficiary to supplement their life while still maintaining their means-tested benefits. Those benefits could include supplemental security income or Medicaid, both which have resource limits. Oftentimes, an individual cannot have more than $2,000 in their name to qualify for those benefits, and setting up a special needs trust allows them to supplement that amount. Along with creating a special needs trust, there are oftentimes a lot of restrictions on these trusts because the Department of Human Services of your state or the Social Security Administration says if you're going to have the benefit of this asset, this trust, there's going to be restrictions. And our speakers today will talk many times about how those parameters on a special needs trust affect how distributions are made to make sure that that trust does not count as a resource and disqualify an individual. That's very basic about special needs trusts. But if you need more information, please feel free to go to the firm's website, www.McAndrewslaw.com. There's a wealth of information and articles on the website, as well as this YouTube channel where you're seeing this today. There are various videos about special needs trusts and planning. Now, without further ado, I'm going to start our questions for our esteemed panelists here today. The first one off is one we get often, and I would say, do you have any advice for clients who are picking a trustee? What are some of the considerations that they should be aware of when deciding who would be a corporate trustee for their trust? I'm going to turn it over first to Becky.
Thank you, Jillian. We often meet with families who are making a choice in trustees. So I always tell people, ask as many questions as you need to get comfortable. And a few things we just, say people should be aware of. Number one is, will there be a dedicated trust officer for their trust and for their family member, rather than, an 800 number to call in? And, how many relationships does each trust officer manage? What's their, caseload like? Are they solely dedicated to administration of trust, or are they also responsible for any sales goals, for example? You would want to be sure you understand how distribution requests are handled. What's that process? You mentioned various types of assets in trust. So some trustees can handle things other than cash and marketable securities. Other trustees cannot. So you want to have an understanding of that. And of course, fees come into play with decisions about trustees. So clients need to have an understanding of what fees might be charged, and if there are any minimum account sizes, that type thing. And I would just say a basic overview and understanding. You mentioned differences between the two companies represented here today, and families need different choices, and there are better fits for each. So just ask whatever comes to mind, but those are a few things we think are important.
Amy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Jillian. Following up on what Becky had said, I do believe that it is important when interviewing and selecting a trustee to make sure that it is a good fit to what you are looking for. You want this to be a long-term relationship. You want it to be a good relationship. And so interviewing prospective trustees, determining, what they have that could meet your needs. For example, all of our trust administrators have significant background in social services. So what they're looking to do is making sure that available benefits are maximized in order to help preserve the assets of the trust. So making sure it's a good fit, calling, talking, meeting in person if that is possible, talking about fees, how the assets are invested, and again, as Becky was saying, how are distributions handled? What does it take in order to access those funds in the trust?
Thank you. So you each mentioned assets in the trust. What type of assets can the trust hold, and does that depend on the trustee? And how does that differ? Amy?
So at Achieva Family Trust, we were really set up to be an option for families of people with disabilities of modest means. The minimum to establish a trust with us is $500. And so we were looking to kind of fill that niche where, banks or other corporate trustees, might not be interested because of the low asset value. We do require that the assets come in as cash, and we use a unique strategy where the assets are invested with two investment managers, and then there's a blended rate of return.
And is there any asset that is a little more complicated that you work with, like real estate?
So we do have the ability to take IRAs and have those remain intact, and then they would come into the trust on a gradual basis through the annual RMD, required minimum distribution. Our board does have a policy against accepting real estate. And, we've made some exceptions over the years, but in general, we really take cash.
And that actually is okay, because typically an individual with a disability can own a home, and it does not count as a resource against them. So that's a good thing to mention, even though the trust can't hold the home. So it's good to know. Becky, what would you like to add as far as asset classes and how Cumberland, as an example, manages and uses investments?
So Cumberland is what's called a directed trustee. And in its simplest form, what that means is that we handle administration. That is our focus, is the administration of the trust. We are directed by the families or the beneficiary to work with their chosen financial advisor and other asset managers. So we're a little bit different from a traditional trustee that manages assets and also handles distributions and the administration. So, for example, if a trust solely holds cash and marketable securities, the family would direct us to work with their financial advisor. The assets would remain there. They would be managed by that financial advisor, but the distributions would flow through Cumberland and out to the family. So we do have the ability to hold non-conforming assets, or if you just think anything that's not cash or marketable securities. So a home, a farm, business interest. The only thing is that we have to do a pretty significant review on the front end to understand the structure of those assets and to be sure there are the appropriate folks in place to manage them, because we don't run businesses. So we have to make sure it's structured appropriately and people are in place to do that. But we are able, because special needs trust, that's one service we offer, but we also have, as you mentioned, various types of trusts we administer. So a lot of families we work with have additional types of assets that we accommodate. Does that help?
Yes, that helps. So for example, if the trust owned a home, you might require that the document working with the attorney that there's a property manager that's able to handle the home and do the repairs, those
and
types of
let us know when repairs are needed, that type thing. Exactly.
Great. So Amy, you mentioned this already, but Becky, if you could just touch on, trust companies have different thresholds to open a trust. Can you just elaborate on that?
I can. So if you see our published fee schedules, you will not see on those minimum account sizes, but you will see minimum annual fees. And sometimes that means we're not the most economical choice for certain size trusts. I typically tell families, if a trust doesn't have at least $1 million in it, we might not be the best choice. If it is a special needs situation or a situation where we call it distinctive care, where we're maybe paying bills for clients, doing some additional services, we typically like to see a couple $1 million liquid in those types of trusts. But again, that's not a hard and fast rule. We take into account the needs of the beneficiary, the age, various, components to make that decision. But those are some guidelines.
And some of the factors could include that the family has more than one trust with you. So they may have trust for non-disabled children and also a special needs trust. And all of those factor into an individualized decision on whether the company would access that with the client.
That's right.
So one of the big questions people ask is, I'm not here and I want to make sure that the beneficiary is receiving things. How are distributions made for a beneficiary from a trust? Becky, if you wanted to start.
Sure. So it's really important that people know that what they execute with their estate planning attorney is really important. That becomes our roadmap as the trust administrator, or our Bible, if you will. So those provisions in there, that's what, as a fiduciary, we will follow. So at the outset of a relationship, the trust officer will have an understanding of what is allowed by the document, and they will have conversations with the financial advisor and with the family. And generally, they will establish a budget, say, for the upcoming year, and that will be approved, and it may be distributed monthly to a beneficiary or whatever, depending upon their needs. So, and then in between, we all know that requests pop up. So our group meets weekly for any additional requests that might need to be approved. And if it's an emergency, we have procedures for making that happen as well. But they're going to look at, what does the document allow? Generally try to stay within a certain percentage of distributions. And, sometimes we have to say no. We'll consider, sometimes we need to consider what is generally their previous, lifestyle. Like if it's a trust left for a surviving spouse, is that surviving spouse, were they accustomed to driving Hondas, or, did they have a Porsche? And we sometimes have to keep that in mind as we get requests and grant those requests.
Thank you. Amy, can you elaborate on how that's handled at Achieva Family Trust?
Sure, and with special needs trust, there is an additional consideration, and that is the protection of eligibility for government benefits, such as Medicaid and supplemental security income, SSI. And so many of our beneficiaries, rely on these benefits. And when we're looking at making a distribution, we want to make sure that those distributions are not going to impact or adversely affect any of those important benefits that people receive. We do have a policy and procedure that talks about, typical distributions from a special needs trust, some prohibited distributions from a special needs trust, particularly if someone is on SSI. The SSI that you receive from the Social Security Administration is designed to pay for food and shelter expenses, such as rent and utilities. And so if there is a distribution made for those items, it could adversely affect those benefits. So we also at Achieva Family Trust do not approve distributions for luxury items, such as expensive jewelry, expensive cars, sports cars, things like that. So we're looking at, the benefits, we're looking at the value of the trust. We like when people are coming into the trust to have a conversation with them and set up recurring payments, if possible, for standard bills that they want to be paid. But we also do have the ability to handle fund requests for things that might not have been set up as a regular payment. We do check runs twice a week, so there's an easy ability to request things from their trust administrator.
And Amy, you also do payback or self-funded trusts, which are solely for the benefit of a disabled beneficiary. How does that in any way affect distributions that might be made?
Yeah, in regard to the sole benefit standard, we are looking at making sure that the trust beneficiary is going to receive the benefit from the distribution, making sure that it is for their sole benefit. It doesn't mean that someone else can't have a tangential benefit from an item, such as watching the television, which is fine, or using a washer or dryer, things like that. But we just want to make sure that the requested distribution is going to be for the sole benefit of the person with a disability.
Thank you. What obligations does the trustee have to a beneficiary in general? Becky?
So one thing I did want to touch on, you can tell from Amy's answer about distributions, how specialized that special needs arena is. And so, we have a team of about 8 individuals that those are the ones who administer the special needs trust here at Cumberland. So, it's a really special group of people with compassion, but they have to have an understanding, like Amy was saying, of the benefits and not disqualifying them or whatnot. So that's part of the obligation that we have. If we take in that type of trust, we have to have the expertise to administer it. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to them. We also, have to set aside our biases and really look at what's in the best interest of that beneficiary. So that's part of our responsibility.
Amy, anything to add?
Yeah, just looking again at fiduciary duty, making sure that the assets are invested. We do have a investment committee and a board who takes a look and oversees the investments, making sure that they follow the policy, and just looking at making sure that the best interest of the beneficiary really is paramount.
Thank you. Oftentimes, families would like to name a co-trustee alongside a corporate trustee. Can you tell us how that would work when there's a individual and a corporate, and how that operates in the distributions and management of a trust?
At Cumberland, we love to work with co-trustees. Some trust companies prefer not to, but we welcome that. And usually the co-trustee is a family member or an individual who knows the beneficiary really well. So we lean on that co-trustee to help us with distribution decisions and understanding the needs of the beneficiary. We like to say, we kind of do the heavy lifting, if you will. So we make sure the tax reporting is done, the distributions are made and whatnot, but we very much consult with that co-trustee and appreciate the insight that they can offer. And sometimes that gives families peace of mind if they name a sibling, for example, as co-trustee. So we're happy to work in that way with families.
And Amy?
Yeah, just like Becky said, we do welcome the opportunity to work with co-trustees, particularly family members who know the beneficiary well and can help advise on distributions. The only thing that I would say is that we also serve as corporate trustee for what's called a pooled trust. And with the pooled trust, the trustee under federal law has to be a nonprofit organization. So that really is the only trust product that we have where we could not serve with a co-trustee. But for our third-party trust and for our payback trust, we are happy to work with family members in a co-trustee relationship.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining me today to answer questions regarding trustees and the responsibilities of a trustee, and many helpful tips for families picking trustees. I appreciate all of your input. I will, along with this, we will post the contact information for both Amy and Becky. So if you would like to reach out and ask any further questions, feel free to do that, as well as I will post our contact information. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.